got everybody's attention out there. Terrific. We now have Mr. Jack Thomas Tomarchio, who is the president of the Agoj Group of LLC, an international strategic consulting firm that specializes in homeland security consulting to the federal government, the intelligence community, state governments, and private industry. In 2005, Mr. Tomarchio was appointed by President Bush to become the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security for Intelligence and Analysis. In 2007, he was promoted to the position of Deputy Undersecretary of Intelligence and Analysis Operations. Mr. Tomarchio holds a BA in History from Pennsylvania State University, a JD from the Vermont Law School, an MGA from the Fell Center of Government of the University of Pennsylvania, and an MSS from the United States Army War College. He started his career as an attorney in the United States Army, where he served as a paratrooper with the 82nd Airborne Division. Good to have some paratroopers in here. That's great. Some fellow paratroopers anyway. He served in the Grenada Invasion Force in 1983 and also served as counsel to a multinational peacekeeping force in the Sinai Arab Republic of Egypt. He currently serves as a colonel in the United States Army Reserves. His most recent assignments were the Staff Judge Advocate for the Military Intelligence Readiness Command, and before that as a Special Assistant to the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low Intensity Conflict in the Pentagon. He is a regular television commentator, writer, and speaker on national security issues. He was an adjunct professor at the Fell Center of Government of the University of Pennsylvania from 2001 to 2005. He is currently an adjunct lecturer at the United States Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank ICT. When I was initially asked to come here several months ago, I was the Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence Operations at the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and when I tendered my resignation from the department in August, I sent the ICT an email and said, if I come in September, I'll be the Deputy Undersecretary of nothing, so you may not want me to be there. But they were very gracious and said, no, we would like you to come. And so I think it's actually a plus, because now that I'm out of the government, I can speak a little bit more candidly about my experiences there and about the Department of Homeland Security. What I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is the intelligence enterprise and how DHS is meeting that challenge in the United States. As you know, the Department of Homeland Security is a child of 9/11. And it was formed after the attacks in New York, Pennsylvania, and in the Pentagon. The mandate of the Department of Homeland Security was said very succinctly by our Secretary Michael Chertoff, and he said, to protect the homeland by preventing bad things and bad people from getting into the United States of America. That's the mandate. When we stood DHS up, we had a very, very difficult challenge. We had over 210,000 people in the department spread over 23 separate agencies with very different cultures. We had agencies that came into DHS as dissimilar as the United States Secret Service and the United States Coast Guard. And now they were all brought together and amalgamated in one organization, told to join hands and sing Kumbaya and be together. That's a difficult cultural thing to do. The Intelligence Directorate in DHS was stood up in the fall of 2005 per a mandate by Secretary Chertoff called the Second Stage Review. And what he did was he put together this standalone organization in DHS headquarters, and he chose an icon of the intelligence community by the name of Charlie Allen, who had been a very senior officer at the CIA to be the first Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Analysis. Charlie Allen, if you don't know him, is again a real icon. He's been in the intelligence community since 1958. And I used to like to tell Charlie, as his principal deputy, that when you joined the CIA, I was 3. He didn't like to hear that, but I like to tell him that all the time. And the mission of our Intelligence Directorate was to evaluate threats to the homeland, to analyze these threats, and to disseminate products to the intelligence community, the state and local governments, and the law enforcement community, and the private sector, and also to coordinate our operations with the rest of the federal intelligence community. Now, as I said to you, standing up DHS was very difficult, and it continues to be a work in progress in many ways. First of all, as I said, we were a new agency, and historically when you form a new agency, it takes years for that agency to get its sea legs, as we like to say. Usually about 10 to 15 years before an agency really hits its stride. Not only were we a new agency doing new things, but our intelligence directorate was now the keeper of a whole new type of intelligence, or a whole new INT, and that was called Homeland Security Intelligence. We had a polyglot workforce, as I said before, people from 23 separate agencies brought together to work as one. And within DHS and within our 23 agencies, we had 23 or maybe 17 separate intelligence directorates. For example, the Transportation Security Agency had their own intelligence directorate. The Secret Service has Secret Service intelligence. Coast Guard has Coast Guard intelligence. They now are supposed to work together, and they work for us. And we have to amalgamate all these different, as I like to say, cats and dogs to work as one organization. We also needed to integrate our activities with the 16 other agencies in the federal government that comprise the federal intelligence community. And that was a very difficult process, because we were kind of the new kids on the block. We had not yet proven our bona fides. We did not have what we say street credentials. And when you walk into a room with the FBI and the NSA and the CIA, that's a very, very unforgiving neighborhood and a very group of tough actors to have to impress that you are now one of their peers. And as you all heard, of course, agencies historically didn't like to share information with each other. The FBI didn't talk to the CIA, and the CIA didn't talk to anybody, and the NSA didn't even exist. So we had these different competing situations. Well, now we're the new kids on the block and say, hi, we're DHS, and we're here to help you and the rest of the state and local community. Well, that's a pretty big stretch for the wizened elders of the intelligence community to accept you with open arms. So in addition to having to deal with these 16 other intelligence agencies, we had to put another layer on that, which was the 50 states that we had to deal with, because they were our primary customers. 50 states, 50 governors, 50 Homeland Security advisors, 50 adjutant generals in the 50 states, and 70 major cities with their own police chiefs and mayors and stakeholders. On top of that, we had a board of directors that watched over us constantly of 535, and that's called the United States Congress, and they were very interested and active in what we did at DHS. We had to deal with the press, we had to deal with the public, and of course we were coming on as an intelligence agency at DHS we were stood up right after, actually during, Hurricane Katrina, where the Department of Homeland Security was roundly criticized for its poor showing in response to that disaster. So we had a very, very tough hill to climb at DHS. To do the mission of providing this new intelligence, this new INT, Homeland Security Intelligence, we had to assemble hundreds of intelligence officers into one coherent organization. And we had to divide that organization into various divisions to address the multiple types of threats we were asked to deal with. And they included, just for a sampling, borders, threats to the border, and threats regarding chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear devices. Threats to our critical infrastructure and the private sector. As you may not know, 80% of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector. So we had to coordinate with the private sector and find a way to share information and threat information with the private sector. We had to deal with issues regarding radicalization and demographics. We were interested in the process of radicalization. How does a person go from an individual who may be interested in jihad to a person who is a supporter of jihad to a person who is a practitioner of jihad? How does that happen within the United States, and how does that happen to, for example, an American citizen in the United States? We're very interested in that, and we set up a division to study that. We also had to set up divisions to deal with production and collection, and a plans and integration division to integrate our own components so that they would work as one. But the major mission at all times, in addition to doing all this work with the intelligence community, the major mission that we were charged with was to support our state and local law enforcement officials around the country. Why is that our major mission? Well, because we realize that the individuals who are out in the states and out in the local communities are really at the tip of the spear when it comes to the prevention of terrorism. Let me give you some examples of that. Timothy McVeigh, the bomber at Oklahoma City, was captured by an Oklahoma State trooper. Well, one of the hijackers who perpetrated the 9/11 attacks was stopped by a Maryland State trooper several days before 9/11. He was not apprehended, but because we didn't know who he was, and that trooper didn't have that information at that time. Eric Rudolph, who bombed a series of abortion centers in Florida and Georgia and throughout the Southeast, and also was the Atlanta Olympics bomber, was caught by a rookie policeman in rural North Carolina trying to get some food from a dumpster. We realized then that the tip of the spear, that the first indicia of terrorism or terrorist activity is not in many cases going to be detected in the Beltway or by a bunch of analysts sitting at a screen. It's going to be detected by a policeman on the beat. It's going to be detected by a security guard, or it's going to be detected by someone out in the community that sees something that's just not right. And therefore, it's our mandate to try and get information to those people, to those first responders, or to those citizens, or to those folks in the private sector who are going to first see that before we see that in the intelligence community within the Washington Beltway. So how do we do this? How do we support the states? What was the method that we worked to reach out to the state and local community? Well, we did this in a number of ways. We published certainly analytical products to the states. We got information out to them. An example, General Meggs talked about IEDs. One of the areas that we looked at was what was happening in the world of IEDs. We looked at what happened in Iraq as a laboratory for a new way to make an IED. A couple of months ago, there was discussion about the utilization and the marrying up of an IED with chlorine gas. And we looked at that and said, well, you know, people are trying to do that in Iraq. As soon as you can imagine that something like that happens, the formula on how to do that appears on the internet. And then some knucklehead in Ohio goes to the internet and says, hey, what a cool idea. I'll marry up chlorine gas to an IED, and I'll blow people up, and then I'll kill them with gas. And that type of a methodology could migrate into the homeland. So we want to understand that, and we want to get that information that is coming out of the intelligence community via Iraq or through the DIA into the state and local law enforcement officials. So we send out analytical products with our colleagues in the intelligence community. We also send out analytical products with our colleagues from the state and locals, because they have very good optic eyes on what's going on in their area, and we can glean from that. We certainly work to facilitate cooperation between the state and locals at conferences. And in the last 2 or 3 years that I was with DHS, we held conferences on radicalization and extremism, the use of the internet to radicalize. We held conferences on border intelligence, chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological weapons, and critical infrastructure intelligence and security. We also work to send out direct support to the state and local community in the way of sending analysts or intelligence officers out to the states and embedding them out in the states. And as you may know, shortly after 9/11, a number of the states around the country put together state and local intelligence fusion centers. What is a fusion center? A fusion center is a place where intelligence professionals and analysts come together in one location where they receive information, tips, leads, call-ins, special reports about things happening in their jurisdiction. They look at that information, they analyze it, they fuse it, and they try to turn it into an actionable intelligence product. These state and local fusion centers, and there are currently 58 now in existence in the United States, eventually there may be 70. These state and local fusion centers exist in states, and they exist in major cities. They are bought and they are paid for by the states. They are not funded by the federal government. Well, we decided that as an outreach to the states, we would go out and we would put our intelligence officers and embed them for 2 to 3 or 4-year tours of duty in the state intelligence fusion center. Why do we do that? We do that because we want to have a good analyst-to-analyst relationship between our officers who represent the federal intelligence community and the state and local folks. We want to work to put them there so they can act as mentors for the analysts working at the state level, because many of these state intelligence analysts don't necessarily have a good understanding of the intelligence community or even the intelligence cycle, and they benefit from having a federally trained officer sitting in their fusion center who can teach them and mentor them in the way of intelligence collection and analysis as it's done in the intelligence community at the federal level. We also want to put our officers there because we get a lot of information from the state and locals. They give us a very good optic on what goes on in their jurisdiction. For example, we may have an interest in prison radicalization in the state of Illinois. Well, we can get about 20 smart guys in the intelligence community in Washington talking about radicalization in the state of Illinois, but we don't know it half as good as the guys who are from Illinois who may work in the Illinois Bureau of Prisons. They can tell you what radical groups are forming up in their prison system, who's on what side, who's recruiting, who's losing members, and that gives us a great optic on what's going on in that state with regard to that particular issue. Gang activity is another area that we're very interested in, and again, we rely upon the intelligence and the data that is collected by our partners at the local level on the gang activity that they see on a day-to-day basis. Weapons smuggling, human trafficking, these are areas, again, that we get our best intelligence not from the federal sector, but from the state and local sector. So by having our officers there on a day-to-day basis, establishing those relationships, because that's what this business is about. It's about building trust and relationships. By having our officers there, that is a great value added to us and to our federal intelligence partners. As I said before, I have a little bit of a throat thing going on, I apologize. As I said before, there are about 58 intelligence fusion centers that exist right now. They are in various stages of maturity. Some of them are very robust, like the one in Illinois or the one in Arizona or the one in New York State or the Los Angeles JRIC down in Southern California. Others are very junior and they're just being stood up. We now have 31 officers deployed and embedded in these fusion centers. We'll hit 35 officers by the end of this fiscal year, which is the 30th of September. And next year we hope to have all 58 fusion centers staffed with officers. Quick question about the fusion centers and about the whole process. People have asked, do these fusion centers really work? Is there anything good about it? You've got all these people sitting around in a room and they're analyzing all this data and they're looking at information and they're analyzing tips and leads and they're looking at a lot of criminal data. Is there any value to that? Are they finding terrorists? Are they answering the mail, as we would say? Well, I would say that the jury is still out in many regards. There have been some successes. They are modest successes. We did have a case arise out of the state of Ohio that had direct reach back to something that MI5 was interested in the Midlands in the UK, and MI5 was able to open an operational file on something that was happening in Ohio that had direct impact on the Midlands. We had some other cases that really revolved around not really terrorism but criminality having to do with child smuggling from California to Holland into Romania. We had another case that you probably have never heard of called the Salmons case. Mr. Salmons was a resident of the state of Virginia, and he was in the process of driving and transporting himself with a catch of weapons to go to the state of Illinois, where he was going to go to the University of Illinois campus, kill a female student and her boyfriend, and then perpetrate a Virginia Tech type massacre of many students at the University of Illinois. That particular case was picked up on a tip and lead from the Virginia Commonwealth Fusion Center, working with the Illinois Stick in Springfield, Illinois. That individual was apprehended en route to Illinois, and that he is now the subject of a federal case being handled by the FBI, and he will be prosecuted. And we do believe that we did possibly prevent a Virginia-style killing. Again, it was not a political terrorism. It was a domestic criminal act. But still, I think issues like that show that the fusion centers can and do, so to speak, answer the mail. A couple challenges remain, and I'll speak very frankly. Some people have said, well, the fusion centers and the whole process of sharing intelligence with the local level maybe should be left in the hands of the FBI. Maybe shouldn't be a DHS. Maybe the fusion centers really are too expensive, and maybe they haven't really met the purpose that they were designed to meet. There is a problem that is a direct problem. It's called the sustainability problem, and these fusion centers are expensive, and with high fuel rates and energy costs, and a very difficult problem for state and local governments who can't pay for the gas for their own fleet, for their police vehicles and their emergency vehicles. Some would say a $3 to $4 million appropriation for a fusion center in Iowa where there's never been a terrorist activity. Maybe that's ill-conceived. So there may be a problem as we go into the next administration where these fusion centers don't get funded, and if they don't get funded, then certainly they may close, and that's a problem, and it's a problem that I think our Congress is going to have to deal with. Certainly there's the jury is out, really, with regard to the Department of Homeland Security. I don't think it's going to go away. It's only a creature of this administration, the Bush administration. There'll be a new administration in several months. That administration may decide that DHS needs to be reconfigured or changed in some different way, and we don't know what will happen there. I think that the department has done a decent job. As I said before, it's a work in progress. It's an incredibly difficult process to build an agency like this with so many players and so many stakeholders. I see that I have about 9 seconds left. I'm going to try and keep precisely to my time here, so I thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions.